Thankfully, that is exactly where the stairs deposited Dean at street level, in the middle of a big square plaza surrounded by skyscrapers made of the same red stone every building had been made of so far, with what seemed to be a lava fountain in the middle of it, all of which was illuminated by dozens of fireballs hovering above the plaza or in old-school street lanterns, and 4 rivers of lava that flowed from the fountain in the middle of the plaza towards the cardinal directions, covered by iron grill covers giving the whole place a truly infernal feel. Demon girls were everywhere you looked, walking from building to building or towards some of the stairs leading to the subway stations, yet none could be seen resting on the benches that were scattered around the plaza. And now that Dean saw so many of them in one place, he noticed that all of them were female and not a single male demon could be seen, making him wonder why that was the case. But he knew, from what the demon girl on the train had told him, that he wouldn't get any answers to that question. So he just walked through the crowd of demon girls towards the biggest building at the edge of the plaza. All the while, all the demon girls moved out of Dean's way, even though most of them were looking to the floor as they walked like zombies towards their destination, avoiding him and the other demon girls around them, seemingly by sheer instinct. Thanks. To that, he got through the crowd so easily that he could look at the buildings around the plaza a bit more closely. Though there wasn't really anything to see really, since none of the buildings were decorated and were as bland as any skyscrapers. He had seen back home, all except one. That being the building he was heading to, since it was the only building Dean had seen here so far that was decorated in the rather familiar Gothic architectural style with lava-spewing gargoyles and everything. This made it rather clear to Dean who that building belonged to, causing him to stop for a moment to take a few deep breaths to calm his nerves before he walked towards its entrance. There he came face to face with 2 examples of a different kind of demon girl. The first thing Dean noticed about them was how tall they were, even when compared to the demon girls he had seen so far, since they towered heads and shoulders above them as well as him. While the second thing he noticed was that they had gray skin instead of the alabaster skin of the demon girls he had seen so far. The next thing he noticed were their horns, because they were more than twice as big as the horns Dean had seen so far, and not only emerged from the top, their heads not, their forehead, but were also curved so that they followed the curvature of the demon girl's skull. They also didn't act like zombies like the other demon girls, though they were not hiding the fact that they were bored out of their minds as they leaned against the wall next to the entrance. Though that being said, they were still sharply dressed, but just a bit differently than the other demon girls, since it was rather clear that these 2 preferred pants over skirts in a more casual style, because of how they wore black suit pants, a black tie, a red suit shirt with rolled-up sleeves along with some metal gauntlets, though only one of them wore a black suit vest while the other wore black suspenders. This gave them a much more tough look then. The other demon girls, which was only emphasized by their broader build and their stern expressions, which became quite severe once they noticed Dean approaching, causing them to push themselves off the wall and move in front of the door, blocking him from entering with their arms crossed under their big breasts. "Get lost, elf. This building is off limits for your ilk." The one in the vest said, her voice as stern as her expression, leaving no room for argument. "Oh, I am no elf, see," Dean said, turning his head to the side once more to show them his ears. Before he continued, "I am a human, and I am here because I was told to go here if I want to make a deal." Causing both of the demon girls to stare at him open-mouthed for a moment, until the one wearing the suspenders extended her hand to carefully pinch his cheek, so as to not hurt him with the claw-like fingers of her gauntlet. Despite that, it still hurt enough for Dean to let out a little "ouch," causing the demon girl to quickly let go. But before she could apologize, the demon girl wearing the vest picked up Dean and cradling him like he was her own child before she said, "Careful with those claws. Humans might be tough, but not that tough," cuddling up to him as she did, causing the demon girl wearing the suspenders to put her hands on her hips and say, "Are you really using that as an excuse to cuddle with him?" As she glared at the other demon girl disapprovingly. "Gasp, I am hurt, sir, that you would even imply that I would stoop so low," the accused demon girl said as she pressed Dean's head against her chest. Sure you wouldn't do that, the same way you would hog him all to yourself, right?" The suspender-wearing demon girl asked in response as she slowly moved closer to the other demon girl while reaching for Dean. Which of course only made the vest-wearing demon girl take a step back so that the other demon girl couldn't reach Dean. Then they just stood there staring at each other for a moment before the suspender-wearing demon girl said, "Oh, come on, let me hold him just once," as she stepped forward and reached for Dean again, causing the other demon girl to take another step back. Then they just stood there again, glaring at each other like two angry cats. But before things could escalate into an entire chase scene, Dean said, "Excuse me, ladies. I am flattered, truly I am, but I kinda got somewhere to be. So could you please put me down?" Causing both demon girls to blush before the vest wearing one put him down while saying, "Oh yeah, sure. Sorry about that, we got a bit carried away," sounding genuinely embarrassed. "Don't worry about it. Anyways, can one of you tell me where I am supposed to go? I have never been here and every hallway until now has looked the same," making both demon girls chuckle. "Yeah, they do. But don't worry, it's really easy, just go inside and then head straight down the hallway to your left until you reach a waiting room," the suspender-wearing demon girl said while pointing at the building's entrance. "Thanks," Dean said as he walked towards the suspender-wearing demon girl to give her a hug, but stopped when he realized he was on chest height with her. However, before he could take a step back, she pulled him against her bosom and held him there for a moment before letting him go to push him in the direction of the entrance. Not knowing how to react to what just happened, Dean just waved them both goodbye before he stepped into the building. Once inside, he found himself in a small, completely empty lobby, maybe 9 square meters big, made of the all-too-familiar red stone. There were 3 paths that lead deeper into the building on his right, left, and ahead of him. Remembering what? The suspender-wearing demon girl had told him he took the left one and followed it until he reached a simple waiting room filled with chairs lining the walls, as well as 2 long rows of airport-style benches leading to a reception desk with a door next to it. At the entrance of it was a sign that said, "Please take a number," with an arrow pointing at a number ticket dispenser. Sighing, Dean just took one and then looked around for somewhere to sit, finding one next to one of the tall, gray-skinned demon girls and quickly headed towards it. Once there, he sat down, turned to the demon girl and said, "Hi, I'm Dean. What are you in for?" Causing the demon girl to turn to him and say, "Oh, hi, I am Mara, and what do you mean by that?" Clearly confused by the question. "You know, what did you do to end up here?" Dean clarified, to which the demon girl replied, "I am here because I was sadly born as a demon in you," doing her best Eeyore impression. "Oh, I got isekai'd by a bunch of elven slavers that didn't even know where they stole me from, so to get home I have to make a deal here," Dean said as casually as he could, causing Mara to raise an eyebrow before she said, "So I guess you aren't an elf then, right?" Making Dean tilt his head to show his ears again in reply, causing Mara's eyes to nearly pop out of her skull before she said, "What, you are a human? What in the fuck are you doing here?" sounding absolutely shocked. "Waiting for my turn, like all of you here," Dean said, raising his ticket and gesturing at the alabaster-skinned demon girls that also sat around the waiting room as he did, causing Mara to stare at him open-mouthed for a moment. "Dude, you know that the average wait time around here is a couple of decades at best, right?" she said, causing Dean's mouth to fall open before he said, "What? I can't wait that long." To which Mara replied, "Obviously just go to the reception desk, she will sort you out." Sighing, Dean got to his feet, but before he walked towards the reception desk, he turned to Mara and said, "Fine, but if I have to fill out a mountain of documents before they help me, I am so out of his bureaucratic hellhole." Mara just chuckled in response, before making a shoe movement with her hand, so he just began to walk towards the reception desk. Once there, he found a somewhat differently dressed alabaster-skinned demon girl, who was right now on the phone with someone, manning the desk. And by somewhat differently dressed, he meant more sexily dressed, because while she wore the same black suit with fitting suit pants and a red suit shirt combo that a lot of the demon girls had worn, she didn't wear a tie seemingly just so that she could show of a lot of cleavage. Add to that her shoulder-long hair as well as the fact that she wore some makeup, and she was hands down the most gorgeous demon girl he had seen so far, as well as the most beautiful woman he had met until now. Which of course made him a bit nervous, so he waited for her to finish her and address him, using the time to calm his nerves. But even when she was finished, she didn't look up and instead just continued to do her work. So he said, excuse me." To get her attention fully, expecting her to tell him to essentially get back to his set in an annoyed and dismissive tone without looking up since she was clearly in a bad mood. But instead, her head snapped up as she flinched a bit back in surprise, so Dean quickly said, "Oh, sorry, didn't mean to scare you," causing the demon girl to blush and wave her hands wildly before she said, "Oh, no, it's all right, I should have seen this coming since I was told to expect your arrival." Dean just stared at her for a moment before he asked, "You were told to expect me?" Somewhat surprised by that, even though he probably shouldn't have been. "Yes, the officer you met when you first arrived informed us of your intentions right after you left. So we prepared everything for your arrival, and now all you have to do is go through this door, follow the hallway beyond it until you reach an elevator, and then take that to the top floor. The boss is waiting for you in her office, which is right in front of the elevator," the demon girl said, proving Dean's suspicions in doing so, but also made him ask, "Wait, if you were expecting me, why did the guards at the entrance not know I was coming?" Causing the demon girl to shrug before she said, "I don't know, but they probably just didn't think that it wasn't necessary to tell them or just forgot to tell them." As if that was completely normal. "Welcome to hell, huh?" Dean said in response, making the demon girl nod and smile knowingly at his words. So Dean just sighed and thanked the demon girl for her help before he walked towards the door, waving her goodbye as he did. Beyond was yet another blank red hallway that he followed until he reached a plain elevator that you could have found in any building on Earth, and rode it to the top floor. Once he left the elevator, he found himself in another square room with a polished wooden door with a gilded door handle, genuinely surprising Dean with its presence. So he carefully touched it before opening it to check if it was real or not, which it of course was. Behind the door was a rectangular office that was tastefully decorated with plants, paintings, display cases, and statues, giving it a bit of the vibe of a museum. The walls and floor were of course made of the all-present red stone with black, gold-trimmed carpet leading from the door to a big wooden desk in front of a wall of flowing lava, bathing the room in a soft red light. Behind that desk in a black leather chair sat another alabaster-skinned demon girl with white horns, between which sat a black thorn headband, wearing the same black suit with black pants, red suit shirt, and black tie many other demon girls had worn, though hers seemed to be of better quality, but also a seemingly silver sigil brooch on her left breast. Her head resting on her clasped hands, her red eyes softly glowing, and a big smile on her absolutely gorgeous face. "Welcome to hell, my dear human friend. Please have a seat," she said, as she snapped her fingers, causing a seemingly rather high quality leather chair to appear in front of her desk in a quick geyser of flames. Dean swallowed before he nervously walked towards the offered chair, looking around as he did to distract himself a bit, which made him realize that all of the things in this room, from the paintings he clearly recognized but didn't know the names of, to the antique coins, statues, weapons, and armor, was human-made. So he couldn't help but ask, "Are all of these the real thing?" Causing the smile of the demon girl to turn a little sad, at least it looked to Dean like that, before she answered, "Some of them are yes, but most are copies. Can't really get my hands on the original, even though I really want to since I am stuck down here. But let's not spoil the mood so quickly, shall we? After all, today is a really special day." As she gestured towards the leather chair she had summoned for him again. The last part somewhat confused Dean, so he asked, "If I may be so bold, Miss Morningstar, but what makes today so special?" as he sat down in the offered chair. "Oh, please just call me Lucy. And today is special because it has been more than 2 millennia since the last human has stepped foot down here for any reason, really. Anyways, this brings up the question of, what brings you down here, my human friend?" Lucy said with a warm smile which made Dean rather suspicious. But he still said, "Well, I was kidnapped from my home by elven slavers, and when I was rescued it turned out that no one knew the location of my world for some reason, leaving me stuck there with the only way home seemingly being to make a deal with a higher elemental or, well, you. So yeah, I came here to bargain for a way home." While keeping a close eye on Lucy's expression to gauge her reaction, expecting it to be hard. But instead, it turned out to be rather easy, because as soon as he told her why he was here, she looked genuinely sorry for him, though he couldn't help but doubt if she actually was or not. "Oh, of course we will have you back home in no time, dear," in the same tone of voice a grandma would choose when she promised her grandchild a present, causing Dean to stare at her before he said, Um, Thank you very much, that is very nice of you, but, what do you want in exchange? Carefully so, as to not be rude and make the devil mad at him. Oh, don't worry about that, you already paid, Lucy replied with a dismissive wave of her hand. I did? Dean asked, genuinely confused, to which Lucy, in reply, just smiled and pulled out what looked like an old-fashioned whiskey decanter filled with a swirling liquid that seemed to change colors at random. Dean just stared at it for a moment, because he kind of recognized the liquid, but just couldn't put his finger on what it was. So he just asked, "What is that?" pointing at the decanter as he did. "That is every single emotion you had since you entered this very room," Lucy answered, as she poured some of the liquid into a fitting whiskey glass before smelling it like it was a fine wine and then drank all of it in one go. Dean just watched her do all of that, not knowing how to react or feel about Lucifer Morningstar, the literal devil, drinking his emotions in front of him, especially when she let out a "ah" that hit the spot, like an alcoholic after having some good spirit. But what he did know was that he had some questions, something that Lucy quickly noticed. "Oh, I can tell that you have some questions, so just ask away," she said, pouring herself another glass of Dean's emotions, which Dean couldn't help but be suspicious of since was dealing with the Prince of Lies. So he asked, "Okay, then what is with the Lucifer from Helltaker cosplay?" First as a test. "Oh, this style has been all the rage ever since the game came out, and thank fuck for that, because what people wore before that was just horrible, so I made it Hell's official uniform," causing Dean to just kind of stare at her for a moment again before he asked, "Wait, what did people wear before that?" out of morbid curiosity. "What do you think a bunch of tired businesswomen with zero reason to dress well would wear?" Lucy asked in return, before she shuddered at the mere thought of it. Dean couldn't really blame her for that, since it was clear that she valued class quite a bit if you looked at the lengths she clearly went to just to hide how tired she was, because it clear from her body language that she indeed was tired, but if you looked at her face, you couldn't see a single sign thanks to some masterful makeup use. But after the second glass of his emotion, one of the signs in her body language disappeared and never reappeared again, making it rather clear that consuming his emotions had some kind of effect. So he asked, "Is there a reason why you are consuming my emotions?" causing Lucy to smile proudly before she said, "Ah, so you noticed. But if I tell you that I might as well tell you the entire story of hell, that okay with you? And don't worry, you can still ask some questions after." As she refilled her glass again, and Dean made himself comfortable before giving her the go-ahead to tell her story. Now this all began thousands and thousands of years ago, right after the first gods had made heaven, and noticed that they couldn't really send all of their sinners to heaven as well. So they created hell, and all of the first demons, giving them the task of punishing all the sinners sent there. And before you ask why they created heaven and hell, well, the reason for that is simple, my dear human friend, to recycle souls. For you see, to create a new soul from scratch, a bit of the power of its creator deity is needed, and let's just say the gods have enough things that drain their power supplies. So they found a way to recycle souls, because if they used a recycled soul, it wouldn't drain their power supplies. But how does one recycle a soul, you ask? Simple, by cleansing it of all the memories it once held essentials, erasing the person it had once been. Heaven apparently achieves that by making people ascend by teaching them to leave all worldly things and desires behind them, while down here in hell we torture people until they willingly jump into the abyss to escape the pain. And soon, this was worked into every single known religion, leading to the angel being worshipped and loved, while we demons were hated, even though we were just doing our job. Anyways, this of course left the demons in general unhappy with their lives, not helped by the fact that since the gods had made it so that we had to live off of the emotions of mortal, as well as the fact that the only emotions that people in hell tended to feel was misery and pain, meaning we had to eat the same thing over and over again for untold hundreds of years since we were not allowed to eat food. But despite that, we didn't rebel and just did our job, until one day we found a new species, back when we still had limited access to the surface. That species was humanity, and finding them changed everything. Because humans did something no other species did, they radiated emotions just by existing. So strongly, in fact, that a demon could not only eat the emotions, without having to refine, Them first, straight out of the air. But not only that, if they were close enough, they could actually feel emotions they had never felt before in their entire life, thanks to being trapped in hell and thusly surrounded by misery. So of course it wasn't at all surprising that we demons got rather quickly attached to the humans, going even so far as to change ourselves to be as attractive as possible to these magnificent beings, which is why we look like women, by the way, making us rather popular with the humans in the process. And it got even better when we learned that when we possessed a human, with the human's permission or not, it would always leave the human in control, but the demon could literally see and feel everything the human did. This not only allowed us to go to places we could not visit thanks to a decree of the gods, but also experience things we could, not like eating food, because it went against our purpose. Of course, this also led to a lot of humans and demons falling in love with each other. And thusly with the humans help we ushered in an age of true happiness for demonkind. But of course these good times could not last, because that was of course not what the gods had created us for. So they banished all humans from all of the known realms, causing the demons to rebel against them, and a war to ensue. A war that we, unsurprisingly, lost, and as a consequence of our action, we were not only banned from ever setting foot on the surface of any of the known realms ever again, but also from leaving hell, which left us prisoners in our own realm. And once we found a way to look into your world, we realized how trapped we truly were. And as we sat there in hell, looking at heaven, thinking of all the wonderful, beautiful, miraculous things the humans had shown us that we could be doing with them, instead, we learned to truly loathe the gods. So we found a way to corrupt their creations to spread chaos across the known realms, and slowly but steadily deprive the gods of the belief they needed to survive, so that they would starve to death. Which of course only made them crack down harder, on us turning hell into the hellhole you see before you now. But now that you are here, things might change for the better. Okay, wait, hold on. How are you demons popular with humans when most religions make you all out to be these cruel monsters? Dean couldn't help but ask. Well, if I had to guess, it's probably because this all happened before these religions existed. Of course I could be wrong about that since I don't exactly know when the Trojan War took place, but that was all you humans could talk about right before you were banished. Which pretty much answered Dean's question, so he moved on to address what Lucy had said before he had asked that question. Okay, so what did you mean by that me being here might change things for the better? Causing Lucy's expression to become serious before she said, because with your help, I can make my people's life better. Before snapping her fingers to make a crystal appear in front of them that gave Dean the same feeling he had gotten when he had looked at the liquid in the whiskey decanter. Is that literally a crystallized emotion? Dean asked in response to the crystal appearing on the table, which seemed to please Lucy. Yes, it is. Or more specifically, a crystallized sin, since we are now only allowed to publicly eat negative emotions. It took us quite a while to perfect this, but we could never use it because the crystals need to be planted in a living mortal to absorb their emotions, and as I already told you, we can't go to the surface for long enough to do that. But you can. Now can't you? Lucy said like a true businesswoman smelling a big opportunity to make some cash, which Dean didn't really know how to reply to. On one hand, he wanted to bring some happiness into the demons' lives after seeing them walk around like dead-eyed zombies, but on the other hand, he wasn't so sure about taking advantage of people to achieve this. Don't worry, we made sure that these crystals absorb emotions so slowly that it won't affect the host's mental state, so that the gods don't notice what we are doing, because if they do, they will just make our lives even worse. But I will take that risk if it means my people can actually experience living for once, even if it is through someone else. And of course, you won't be doing this for free, my friend. So think of this more like a mixture of a job offer and us helping each other, because I know for a fact that your life isn't that different from ours. So while you want to return to your world and its comforts, but you also don't want to give up your probably one chance in a lifetime chance to live a life that only exists in fiction that easily now, don't you? So help me, and you can not only go home but also live that life. I know you don't trust me, and I can't blame you for that because I would be lying if I told you that I don't have any blood on my hands. But what isn't a lie is that it is not the blood of innocent people. And it's also not a lie that all I want you to do is plant a few of these inside some gangsters, for example, every day, or extract a few of them each day and then bring them to us. What you do before or after that, I don't care. Just do that, and I will pay you so that you can live a very good life indeed. So what do you say? Will you help us and in turn, let us help you to live? Lucy asked, extending her hand towards Dean. Dean in turn just stared at it for a moment deep in thought before he raised his head and asked, "That is really all you want me to do? Not, collect people's souls or something like that, and these crystals really don't harm or change people?" Staring directly into Lucy's red eyes the entire time. "I would be lying if I told you that making deals with people for their souls is not something I want to do to get some of the souls of corrupt priests that will otherwise go to heaven thanks to just being servants of the gods. But we can't leave hell, and we can only possess someone for so long to maybe put one or two ideas into people's minds to cause a little chaos. So yeah, if I had a human for that job, I would absolutely do that. But I know that you are not somebody that could do this, and I won't force you to do that either. And as I said before, we made sure that the crystals don't harm or change people, so that the chance of them being discovered is as small as possible." Lucy answered, not lowering her hand a single bit, and returned Dean's gaze without looking away a single time. So Dean just stared into those red eyes for a moment, trying to find the slightest hint of a lie, but failed. And so he took her hand, causing Lucy's to smile the most radiant smile he had ever seen in his life, before she said, "Excellent, now I do believe that a celebration is in order, because I don't know about you, but I see a great future ahead of us. Just as your mother promised. Welcome to the Summoner course, my dear apprentices. I am Professor Galadrin, and I shall be your guide, as well as your instructor for the duration of your stay in His Most Esteemed Royal Highness's School for the Magic Arts," the elf said with the air of someone that genuinely took pride in his chosen profession. Something Dean could absolutely not relate to, having been a retail worker before he had been kidnapped by elven slavers that summoned people from other worlds to sell them to the highest bidder. Thankfully, local law enforcement busted their operation before he could be sold. But unfortunately, not even the slavers knew where they had summoned him from, so he was stuck, and the only way to get home was to find a creature old or powerful enough to know where he came from. The easiest way of doing that was to just summon something like a higher elemental spirit and ask it for help, which was exactly why he was here, to learn how to do that and then escape this medieval hellhole. Now he wouldn't deny that at first he was just as excited as every nerd would be upon being isekai'd to another world, right until he learned that this was essentially a medieval monarchy, with all the downsides that entailed for a commoner like him. Sure, with how they have been treating him so far, it was unlikely that they would make him a serf, which couldn't even marry or leave their lord's property without said lord's permission, but they definitely wouldn't make something like a knight, let alone a noble. So he would still have to deal with arrogant nobles treating him like shit and trying to take advantage of him without him being able to do much against it. And even if one ignored the entire social dynamic between nobles and commoners, this was a world where any form of insurance wasn't even invented yet, which means that if you, for example, went into the forest to pick berries or mushrooms, only to get mauled by one of absolute buttload of monsters this world had, leaving you unable to work, you couldn't expect any help from the state, the church, since they worshipped a goddess of magic, not mercy, or the people around you. Not because the people here were cruel or something like that, though they were not the nicest or the most tolerant bunch either, but simply because they couldn't afford the extra mouth to feed and the healing spells or prosthetics necessary to help you, since they were so expensive that even the American health system would call the prices absurd, so only nobles could afford them. And since pretty much every person here believed that this system of governance was put in place by their creator deity, and thusly the only true way to rule a world, with every attempt to change things being often seen as heresy things, were unlikely to change even if someone like Dean tried to make it happen. Not that he would, since the only thing that awaited him if he dared to try was very likely death, though there was a little voice in the back of his mind that told him that the elves wouldn't dare to do that, and it had a point. After all, ever. Since they found him, the elves have been treating him a bit too well. Now, he wasn't complaining, but it was weird how well they were treating a random commoner from another world. So well, in fact, that they let him, a commoner, join a royal school for the magic arts that was pretty much only attended by nobles, with only a handful of commoners ever being accepted in its entire history. Even more odd were the glances everybody in his class were throwing his way every now and then, because they weren't filled with disdain, scorn, or any other emotion you would expect a room full of nobles to have for a commoner, but instead, they were often almost fearful. The best example of this was the very professor in charge of this course, who had throughout his entire welcome speech repeatedly thrown glances his way, not to see if Dean was paying attention, but to check if he had moved, judging by how his eyes darted to Dean whenever he moved. Add to that the way a lot of the elves had quickly made way for him when he walked to his classroom, it was clear that humanity had a reputation. And just to be clear, not like how Taylor Swift has a reputation, but how Stalin has a reputation. Which made the entire experience of sitting in a classroom of a magic school full of teenage elf nobles while listening to a rather standard and thusly boring welcome speech from Professor Galadrin of the summoning course even weirder. Thankfully, the speech wasn't too long and Professor Galadrin quickly moved on to something more interesting, that being the evaluation test. A test that had been put in place, according to the professor, by the goddess of this realm herself, to gauge the strength and potential of students, not only so that the students could see how they improved, but also so that the professors could see who was lagging behind so that they could help them. Though Dean couldn't help but think that the royal family used this test as well as the school as a way to gauge the power of the noble houses at least somewhat. After all, God-given title or not, there would always be a person greedy enough to overthrow you because they think they are strong enough to succeed. Anyways, the test was rather simply, the professor would call someone forward, and then the student would summon the most powerful thing that they could, which was somewhat problematic for Dean, since he had unsurprisingly never summoned anything in his entire life. Thankfully, though, he was the last person the professor called forward, so he had more than enough time to observe every detail of the summoning rituals of his classmates so that he could copy them. Sadly, though, that didn't really help him, because all his classmates did was kneel down, put their hands on a summoning circle Professor Galadrin had drawn, and seemingly put some mana into it, judging by how the circle began to glow shortly after they touched it. Then a short while later, a low to mid-tier spirit would appear for a minute or two, before the student dismissed it, and then returned to his seat while the rest of the class clapped. Then the next student was called forward, which was, of course, rather useless to Dean since he wasn't even sure he had a mana equivalent and if the summoning circle could even be powered by that energy. So when he was finally called forward, he just decided to give it a good old-fashioned try, and if he failed, he would just have to search for a way so that he could use mana. But as he walked towards the summoning circle, he quickly noticed how intently the entire class, including Professor Galadrin, were now staring at him, their eyes filled with expectations like he was the top student of the class or some sort of genius. It made him honestly rather nervous because he wasn't used to people looking at him like that. So when he finally reached the summoning circle, after what felt like forever to him, he was so nervous that he had to take a few deep breaths to calm down before he kneeled down and put his hands on the circle. Almost immediately, he felt an energy that he never knew was there flowing from his fingertips into the summoning circle, making the white chalk lines turn blacker than the deepest void, before the floor in the middle of the circle began to crack. Open flames spewing from the cracks until, with a final dramatic geyser of flames, an elevator emerged from the ground and opened with an audible ding. Dean just stared at it as he got to his feet, unable to believe what had just happened for a moment, before the little voice returned telling him that this was his chance to get out of this medieval hellhole, and once more it had a point. Sure, it was pretty obvious from the flames and the sulfur smell that this elevator's final destination was the very bowels of hell itself. But that was actually perfect for Dean, since demons were one of the few creatures or spirits powerful enough to travel between worlds, and making a deal with them was pretty much as dangerous as making one with a higher elemental spirit, because Jinnis are elementals as well. So Dean took another deep breath, and then walked towards the elevator that was patiently waiting for him. Professor Galadrin tried to stop him, but there seemed to be a force field around the summoning circle that he couldn't get through. So Dean ignored his shouts to stop and stepped into the elevator, the doors closing behind him as soon as he had entered. Then the elevator started moving. At first, it was a completely smooth and silent ride, which made Dean rather nervous because he couldn't help but question if he had made the right choice now that he was here. But then elevator music started playing, causing Dean to stare completely dumbfounded at the elevator ceiling for a few moments because of the song choice. After all, Who expects a upbeat song that was literally designed to be a one-hit wonder, from a cartoon show to play in an elevator to hell? This left Dean unsurprisingly rather confused, but at the same time he was grateful for that song because it lightened his mood quite a bit and distracted him enough to stop his mind from coming up with ever more ways of how this could go wrong. So he spent the rest of his drive in the elevator singing and dancing a bit to the song, getting ever more into it as time went on, until the elevator doors opened right when he sang, "Gitchy, gitchy, go mean that I love you," causing him to freeze up for a moment from surprise when he noticed, because he hadn't noticed that the elevator had stopped. Then, after taking another deep breath to collect himself, he stepped out of the elevator and looked around. The rectangular room he now found himself in looked somewhat like a waiting room, mostly because of the chairs next to walls and the two long rows of airport-style benches in the middle of the room. There were also 3 doors on each of the long sides of the room, and one more door next to what seemed to be a reception desk, behind which sat a white-haired woman wearing what looked like a black security officer uniform made up of a black officer's jacket with a pentagram badge, black suit pants, a red suit shirt, a black tie, and a fitting officer's hat. She was clearly sleeping on the job, seeing as her feet were on the desk, and her eyes were covered by her hat. Besides that, the room was empty. Not even a painting hung on the red walls, and no carpet covered the red floor. So Dean walked towards the reception desk, even though he knew what a dumb idea it was to wake a sleeping demon, and when he reached the desk, he carefully said, excuse me. But before he could ask any questions, the demon lazily raised her hand and pointed in the general direction of the doors to her left, before she said, "You go through the middle door and then you take a left at the intersection, you're welcome," causing Dean to stare at her for a second before he asked, "Okay, is that where I am supposed to go?" Making the demon girl chuckle a bit as she said, "You must be new here, huh?" Without even looking up, causing Dean to chuckle a bit as well and rub the back of his head before he said, "Yeah, it's my first time here, so I have no clue how this works or where I am supposed to go." That answer finally made the demon girl turn her head towards him and push her hat up so that it didn't cover her eyes anymore, to look at him slowly, tilting her head as she did. "A elf? What are you doing here?" Dean chuckled a bit at that before he said, No, I am not an elf, see." Turning his head to the side to show the demon girl his ears, causing her red eyes to nearly pop out of her skull, and then she got to her feet so fast she nearly jumped out of her chair before grabbing his face, tilting it every which way, studying every detail of it. Then she stopped and just stared at him for a moment before she whispered, "You are a human." Her excitement clearly visible in not only her voice as well as her red eyes, but also in her wagging black tail. It was the kind of tail one would expect a demon to have down to the arrowhead-shaped tip, but that was not the only thing about her that was now visible that she had stood up, because it also revealed 2 smooth little black horns protruding from her forehead. How tall she was and how pretty she was. The reasons why those last 2 were worth mentioning was because as a dude that was taller than 1.8 meters, he wasn't used to women being tall enough to be at eye level with him, and as a pretty average-looking dude, he was even less used to being this close to a alabaster-skinned beauty like that, or her being that happy to see him, so he was somewhat understandably confused as well as a bit nervous. But despite that, he managed to ask, "Yes, I am. So, where am I supposed to go if I want to make a deal?" Without stuttering something he was rather proud of. That managed to pull the demon girl out of her reverie, and now it was her turn to chuckle nervously before she said, "Oh, sorry, it has been a hot minute since a human has come down here, so I got a little too excited. Anyways, you just go through this door and just go straight until you reach a subway station. From there, you take the next train to the Royalson Plaza, and then just go into the biggest building there. They will set you up," pointing at the door, besides the reception desk with one hand while she still held Dean's face with the other. The way she said that and how she had treated him in general rather surprised Dean, because she was just way too nice for a demon. Though, of course, Dean wasn't complaining, he was confused about why she acted this way. But he wasn't here to learn about demon lore, so he just said, "Thanks," before he walked towards the door, the demon girl holding his face for as long as she could, which was a bit awkward. But when he reached the door, he couldn't help but look back, finding the demon girl waving him goodbye, looking so genuinely sad that he was leaving that Dean waved back and gave her a warm smile before he stepped through the door. The hallway beyond was just as red and undecorated as the waiting room had been, making Dean more than once question how the demons managed to find their way around this place since there were no signs or even arrow to show the way as far as he could tell, leaving him little choice then to follow the directions the demon girl had given him. Thankfully, though, the way to the subway station really was as simple as the demon girl had said, so a bit more than 10 minutes later, he arrived without any problems, just in time for the next train to Royal Sin Plaza to arrive, which Dean couldn't help but be a little suspicious of since it was just a bit too convenient and he was in hell. But despite that, he still went onto the train, and once he was inside, he was greeted by a train cart full of demon girls doing their best impression of Japanese salarymen coming home from another at least 12-hour shift at work. Adding to that was the fact that all of them were sharply dressed in full black suits with fitting pants or skirts, but some of them also wore fancy black sweaters or a black suit vest instead of a suit jacket with red suit shirts beneath as well as black ties, and also because all of them held or hugged fitting black briefcases. But what stayed the same was the color palette, since they all had white hair and wore clothes that were black or red, as well as the fact that they were all asleep. That last part was no exaggeration. Every single demon girl in this train cart was clearly asleep, so none of them even noticed Dean entering, making him honestly pity the demons a bit as he searched for a spot to sit, quickly finding not one but two spots right next to one another. Once he had sat down, he looked around to find a map of the subway system to find out how many stations were between him and Royal Sin Plaza, but couldn't find one, making him once more question how the demons found their way around. Especially when a few minutes later the train came to a halt at the next station, causing a few of the demon girls to suddenly wake up and get off the train, before the train moved on all without a single announcement of where they had been or where they were going. This left Dean with very little choice than to hope that Royal Sin Plaza was, befitting its name, so gaudily decorated in comparison to the other stations so far, that it was rather hard to miss, or that the station had a sign, and with the fact that the train had a sign telling passengers where it was headed, why wouldn't this clearly important station have one? Sure, he could just ask one of the demon girls or get off the train to search for a map of the subway system, but Dean felt way too bad for the demon girls to rob them of their sleep, and seeing as how he hadn't seen a map in the station he had got on the train. It was rather unlikely that the others had one, so it would just be a waste of time to search for a map. So Dean just sat there for a few minutes, just looking out the window, but quickly stopped since there was nothing to see outside. Then the same red stone walls everything here seemed to be made out of, and the inside the cart wasn't any better since they were just as undecorated. Additionally, all of the demon girls were asleep, so there wasn't even anybody to talk to. That left Dean rather bored to the point that he kinda wished for something to happen, and as soon as he did, the demon girl to his right slid to the side, so that her head landed on his shoulder, causing him to freeze up and stare at her for a moment because he had not seen this coming. Additionally, this was also something that had never happened to him since he didn't use the subway a lot, so he didn't really know what to do in a situation like this. And while debated internally what he should do, the demon girl actually cuddled up to him, even scooting over to do so, somewhat making the decision for him. So he just sighed and let the hot businesswoman demon girl rest on his shoulder, since she was clearly way too comfortable to just push her away, and it wasn't uncomfortable to him either, thanks to her horns being so short, though it was kinda weird to Dean how much she seemed to enjoy this, judging by her smile. Anyways, now that he couldn't really move anymore, he had no choice but to wait until he arrived at his destination, which was exactly what he did, just sitting there for at least half an hour, just watching the red wall fly past the window and demon girls leave the train completely bored, but also rather comfortable despite the demon girl resting on his shoulder. But then things changed when for the first time Dean had been on this train, some demon girls got on the train, and one of them slumped into the seat to his left. Dean kinda expected her to question why he was here, just like the security officer demon girl had done, or acknowledge his presence in some other way. But instead, she just blankly stared ahead while hugging her briefcase, making Dean question if she had even noticed him. So Dean tapped her lightly on her shoulder to get her attention, but the demon girl didn't even react to it, causing him to lean forward as far as he could with the other demon girl on his shoulder to take a better look at her face. And when he did, he noticed just how tired she looked thanks to the giant bags under her eyes, as well as the fact that her red eyes were glazed over with barely any life left in them, making her look like a zombie. Even when he raised his hand and waved it in front of her face, she didn't react at all, making Dean worry so much about her that he lightly grabbed her shoulder and shook her a bit. The effect of that on the demon girl was nearly instant life quickly returning to her eyes, causing her to look around for a moment like she had just woken up and didn't know where she was, before looking at him after noticing him. She kinda just stared at him, her red eyes wide like a deer in the headlights of a car, causing Dean to ask, "Are you all right?" Unable to keep the genuine worry out of his voice, which the demon girl seemed to actually be touched by, making her genuinely smile and say, "Yeah, I am all right, just another Tuesday down here," seemingly to alleviate his worry. But of course that didn't really work, only making Dean blurt out, "Wait, this is normal down here?" Causing the demon girl to just shrug before she answered, "Yeah, pretty much, look around you," gesturing at the other demon girls as she did, making Dean realize that they all had the same giant bags under their eyes like she had. Wow, I knew this was hell, but I didn't expect it to be for the demons as well, Dean said, causing the demon girl to chuckle and say, "Yeah, nobody ever does. Anyways, why are you here?" Causing Dean to rub the back of his head before he said, "Oh, I came to make a deal, and I was told that to do that I had to go to the biggest building in Royalson Plaza," which certainly got the demon girl's attention. Yeah, that certainly is the place to go, not only if you want to make a deal, but also if you want to get some answer, which I am pretty sure you do. Oh, and before you ask, I am just a rank and file demon. I can only give you the basics because, well, she said, then looked around as if to make sure nobody was listening in on their conversation before she continued, "I don't have the power to be too rebellious with them listening," whispering the last part to Dean so that only he could hear it, making him look around in an attempt to find who she was talking about. But of course, he didn't see anybody suspicious except all the demon girls in the train, but she obviously didn't mean them, so he asked, "And I guess you can't tell me who they are?" Causing the demon girl to nod in reply, but also to point upwards clearly to hint at who she was talking about. "All right, fair enough, so what can you tell me then?" Dean asked out of curiosity, which the demon girl replied to by saying, "Just that. This place is how it is as a punishment for something we did a long time ago." With a shrug, as she looked up at the ceiling, clearly lost in some of her memories of the past. Dean really wanted to ask more questions about that, but knew that he wouldn't get any answers, so instead he asked, "Do you perhaps know how many more stations it is till this train arrives at Royalson Plaza?" Because that was more important, pulling the demon girl out of her reverie. "What? Oh yeah, it's just 3 more stations than you are there," she said, seemingly caught a bit off guard by the question. "Oh, okay, but how do you know that? Just a few minutes ago, you were pretty much a zombie, and there hasn't been a single announcement telling us where we are, so how do you know where we even are?" Causing the demon girl to chuckle a bit before she said, "Dude, I have been doing this for a long time. After a while, you just know where to go instinctively." Dean kinda just stared at her for a moment after she said that, somewhat unable to believe what he just heard before he said, "This place truly is hell, huh?" Chuckling in sheer disbelief, the demon girl quickly joining in before she too put her head on his remaining shoulder and said, "Yeah, it truly is." Then she closed her eyes and almost immediately fell asleep. Dean just chuckled at that, and then let her sleep since she clearly had a rough day, and it wasn't uncomfortable for him. So he made himself as comfortable as one could be with one demon girl on either of his shoulders and waited for the train to arrive at his destination. And about 10 minutes later, he arrived, so he carefully pushed both of the demon girls off his shoulders so that they sat up straight again so as to not wake them up, then left the train. Once he did, he noticed that this station looked the exact same as all the other stations he had seen so far through the train windows, meaning that it was a standard subway station made of red rock without a single decoration. But at this point, Dean expected that, and thusly didn't even bother to be annoyed. Instead, he headed straight for the stairs leading to, hopefully, what counted as street level down here. Thanks for diving into this story with me. Don't miss out on the next one. Hit that subscribe button, give this video a big thumbs up, and drop a comment below with your thoughts. I'd love to hear what you think.